It began with a quiet determination to do something meaningful, something that would show deep gratitude for all the sacrifices that had been made over the years. Every small earning, every late night shift, and every bit of saving was done with one purpose: to create a moment that would bring happiness and pride to those who had given everything without ever asking for anything in return. There was no luxury involved, just pure love and intention behind the act. The idea of gifting a trip wasn't about showing off or proving success. It was about giving back a piece of peace to those who had forgotten what it felt like to rest and enjoy life for themselves. It was about watching them smile, free from worries, and finally seeing them be the ones cared for instead of always being the caregivers. The planning wasn't easy. Money didn't come easily either. Every expense was measured, every unnecessary purchase avoided. Instead of spending on personal desires or social outings, everything was quietly redirected into a small savings account that slowly grew over time. Each deposit carried a feeling of purpose. It wasn't just money being collected. It was a dream being built one moment at a time. There was an unspoken hope attached to it, a belief that the effort would one day bring joy worth far more than the sleepless nights it took to make it happen. Once the savings were finally enough, the excitement of turning the idea into reality began. Choosing Australia wasn't random. It was a place they had often mentioned when talking about someday. That word, someday, had always sounded like a wish that would never come true, a distant dream hidden behind responsibilities and routines. Turning that someday into today felt like magic, like rewriting the story of their lives for a week of freedom, researching destinations, comparing flights, reading reviews. It all became a project of love. Every click and search came with a smile, picturing how happy they would be seeing places they had only talked about in passing. The hotel was chosen not for its luxury but for its view, because it was imagined how they'd wake up to sunlight over the ocean and finally take a deep breath without thinking about bills, stress, or worries. There was joy in imagining them walking hand in hand through beaches, trying new foods, taking photos, and laughing like they used to. The plan was perfect in every sense, a reflection of care, effort, and the kind of love that doesn't need words. It wasn't just a trip. It was an expression of appreciation that couldn't fit into simple thank yous. It was a way of saying, you deserve happiness, without speaking it out loud. It was the hope that after years of giving, they could finally receive something back. In those 2 moments, saving for months and planning every detail, lay the purest intention possible to give a gift made not of money, but of heart. When the surprise was finally revealed, the air felt light and filled with joy that couldn't be faked. The reaction was everything that had been imagined. Eyes widened, hands covered mouths, and laughter echoed through the room. It felt like all the effort, all the quiet sacrifices and sleepless nights had been worth it in that single moment. Watching their faces light up brought a warmth that went deeper than words. For once, everything felt right, like love had taken physical form in the shape of plane tickets and hotel bookings. It wasn't just a trip being gifted, it was gratitude, love, and a lifetime of unspoken emotions finally expressed through action. They couldn't stop thanking, couldn't stop talking about how unbelievable it was. Their excitement spread through every corner of the house. They started discussing what to pack, what to see first, what meals to try, and how it would feel to be on that long flight for the first time. Every little detail mattered. There was laughter, there was chatter, and there was an undeniable bond that came from the shared feeling of happiness. It felt like the world had slowed down to capture that one perfect memory, a memory of giving and receiving without expectations or conditions. But joy, as pure as it seemed, began to fade sooner than expected. Just a few days after the announcement, something felt off. The same excitement that had filled the room started to quiet down. Conversations grew shorter. There were whispers exchanged between closed doors and glances that carried something unspoken, something uneasy. It was subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. The very gift that was meant to bring everyone closer suddenly felt like it had created a space between them. Then came the moment that turned the excitement into disbelief. The news was shared casually, almost like it wasn't a big deal. They had decided to invite someone else on the trip. Not just anyone, but someone unexpected. Someone who hadn't contributed, hadn't been part of the plan, and hadn't even known about it until now. The justification was that it would be nice to include family, to make it more fun, to not let anyone feel left out. But beneath those words was something that didn't sit right. The meaning of the gesture had been twisted. The focus shifted from love to convenience, from gratitude to obligation. The feeling that followed wasn't anger at first, it was confusion. It didn't make sense how something so thoughtful could be changed without a second thought. What had been carefully planned to show appreciation had suddenly become something unrecognizable. The joy of seeing their smiles had turned into the pain of realizing that presence no longer mattered as much as it once did. The trip that was meant to celebrate connection had somehow begun breaking it apart before it even started. The silence that followed said more than any words could. Something had changed and it couldn't be taken back. The decision to take the unemployed aunt instead felt like a wound that didn't bleed on the outside, but cut deep where it couldn't be seen. It wasn't about the money or the trip itself. It was about what the choice represented. The aunt had always carried a strange energy around her, one that mixed pity with envy. There had been moments when she played the victim, twisting small things into reasons to gain sympathy. Every family gathering became an opportunity for her to talk about her struggles, about how no one cared, about how life had been unfair. People tolerated her out of obligation, not affection, but somehow she always managed to get her way. The truth was, she had never been supportive. There was always a subtle tension, a feeling that no matter what good happened, she would find a way to make it about herself. And now, once again, she had managed to slip into a place that wasn't meant for her. The trip had been something earned through months of sacrifice and love, but suddenly it had turned into her escape, her reward for simply existing in the right place at the right time. The explanation given was that she needed a break and deserved to experience something nice too. But beneath those excuses was the sting of betrayal. The people who were supposed to protect the intention of the gift had instead rewritten it to fit someone else's comfort. It was a strange, hollow kind of heartbreak watching others justify something that felt so clearly wrong. The idea that kindness could be taken advantage of so easily was a lesson learned in silence. The days leading up to their departure were heavy. Luggage was packed. Plans were finalized, and yet everything felt different. The excitement that once filled the home was gone, replaced with forced smiles and awkward conversations. When the time came to say goodbye, the moment that was supposed to be emotional and full of love felt staged. There was a polite hug, a few words of thanks, and a promise to send pictures. The aunt smiled like she had earned something great, while the ones left behind stood quietly, trying to hide disappointment behind understanding. When the photos began arriving, the silence turned to ache. Each image told a story that didn't include the one who had made it all possible. There they were, smiling by the beach, posing near landmarks, laughing at dinner tables. Completely at ease, the aunt stood in the middle of every photo, as if she belonged there, as if she was the reason for the joy. And each picture was a reminder that love, no matter how pure, can sometimes be misplaced. It was a strange feeling, wanting them to be happy, yet hurting at how they had chosen to be happy without thinking about what it cost someone else. Every photo felt like a quiet message saying, "You were never really part of this." That realization settled like a shadow that wouldn't fade, no matter how hard it was ignored. The days that followed were filled with a silence that hurt more than any argument ever could. Each time a message notification appeared with another cheerful vacation photo, the heart sank a little deeper. Smiling faces, sunsets, beaches, dinners. It all looked perfect on the surface. But behind every image was the same question that refused to go away. How could something done out of pure love lead to this kind of pain? There was no way to unsee it, no way to ignore the growing emptiness that each picture brought. The world moved around as usual, but everything felt dull and distant. The laughter in those photos seemed to echo with betrayal. It wasn't jealousy, and it wasn't anger. It was disappointment so deep it felt like grief. Seeing the people who meant everything enjoying a gift meant to be shared, without even acknowledging the absence of the one who made it possible, was unbearable. Each picture felt like proof that love wasn't enough to hold people close, that sometimes even the purest intentions could be forgotten. Every smile they shared together over there was a quiet reminder that someone had been replaced. That loyalty had a limit, and that appreciation could fade faster than anyone expected. At home, the silence grew louder. Every corner of the house reminded of the excitement that once filled it when the surprise had first been revealed. Now, it was just emptiness. The phone would buzz again with another update from their trip, and yet the only thing left to do was smile through it, pretending to be happy for them. Responding with words like, "looks amazing," or "so glad you're enjoying it," became a routine, even though each word felt like a lie. It was easier to act fine than to admit that something beautiful had been turned into something that hurt to even think about. When they finally returned, the change in their energy was impossible to ignore. They came back with stories, souvenirs, and smiles, but the warmth that once existed between them had faded into something colder. They spoke about the trip endlessly, but somehow the story never included the one who made it happen. Every mention of the aunt came with laughter and praise. She had apparently been such great company, so fun to travel with, so easygoing. It was as if the entire purpose of the trip had been rewritten, erasing the effort and the intention behind it. The difference in their tone, the subtle distance in their words, and the way they avoided looking directly when talking about the trip said everything. Gratitude had been replaced by a strange discomfort, as if the gift had turned into a burden they didn't want to acknowledge. The space that once held love now felt heavy with misunderstanding and unspoken resentment. So what was meant to bring everyone closer had somehow built a wall instead, one made not of anger, but of quiet heartbreak and disappointment that could never be fully explained. The change after their return became impossible to ignore. The warmth that used to fill every conversation was gone, replaced by a strange, careful distance. It wasn't the same kind of silence that came from being tired or distracted. It was a silence that held judgment, one that made even simple words feel heavy. The aunt's influence was everywhere, though it wasn't openly admitted. She had a way of twisting truths, of making stories bend in her favor until even the most genuine intentions looked selfish. Slowly, the image of the one who had done something out of love began to blur, replaced by the false version she had painted, a version that seemed ungrateful, dramatic, and full of ego. It was subtle at first. There were little comments, quiet glances, and questions that hinted at doubt. "Why didn't you just come along? You didn't have to make such a big deal out of it. You always act like no one appreciates you." They sounded harmless on the surface, but each one carried a piece of poison carefully planted by the aunt. She had returned not just from a vacation, but with an agenda to make herself look like the victim who had finally been shown kindness, and to make someone else look like the problem who never could be satisfied. It hurt more than words could express. The same people who once believed in every word now looked uncertain, almost suspicious. It wasn't a loud betrayal, but a quiet one that unfolded in their expressions and their tone. Trying to explain would only sound defensive, so there was nothing left to say. The truth had already been twisted, and the more it was fought against, the deeper it sank into disbelief. The decision to confront them didn't come from anger. It came from exhaustion. There was a hope, fragile and desperate, that maybe by speaking openly, things could be cleared. Maybe they would listen. Maybe they would remember who had planned every detail, who had sacrificed months of savings, and who had done it all out of love, not expectation. But when the moment finally came, when the truth was spoken, it wasn't met with understanding. It was met with coldness. The words hung in the air, but no one seemed to hear them. The room felt heavier with every second of silence. The faces that once radiated warmth now looked almost unfamiliar, distant, like strangers who had already made up their minds. No one defended, no one comforted. The only thing that filled the space was disappointment, not theirs, but the quiet realization that no explanation would ever be enough to undo what had been said in secret. It became clear in that moment that loyalty could be so fragile, that love without trust was nothing more than a performance. The silence that followed wasn't just the end of a conversation. It was the end of something much deeper. The quiet acknowledgement that everything had changed and nothing could ever go back to the way it was. Realization often comes quietly, not through confrontation, but through a kind of stillness that feels heavier than words. After everything that had happened, it became clear that love alone wasn't enough to hold people together. Love could make someone give, sacrifice, and forgive endlessly. But without respect, it became one-sided, a devotion that drained rather than healed. The kind of love that keeps giving without ever being seen starts to feel like pain wearing a kind disguise. It was a lesson that didn't arrive suddenly. It grew through the silence, through the moments when gratitude was replaced by indifference, through every time effort was dismissed as unnecessary or dramatic. It became impossible to ignore that sometimes the people who are loved the most are the ones who take that love for granted the easiest. The truth settled like a quiet acceptance. It wasn't about proving who was right anymore or forcing anyone to understand. It was about recognizing that staying in the same place, constantly giving where appreciation no longer existed, was only going to lead to more heartbreak. Sometimes the hardest act of love is stepping away from the people who never learned how to value it. It didn't come from anger or bitterness. It came from a need for peace. Because continuing to fight for space in hearts that had already chosen someone else wasn't strength anymore. It was surrender. The decision that followed wasn't planned. It came in a moment of calm, after countless nights, replaying everything that had happened. There was no dramatic outburst, no final argument, just quiet clarity. A choice was made to stop waiting for the respect that would never come. To stop holding on to a bond that had already been broken in silence. Actions replaced words. The distance that had once felt forced now became freedom. There was pain, of course, because letting go of people who once felt like home never comes easy. But there was also relief. The kind that comes from realizing that peace doesn't come from fixing others. It comes from finally choosing yourself. The reaction to that decision was exactly as expected: shock, confusion, disbelief. The same people who had once doubted loyalty now questioned the withdrawal of it. They called it selfish, dramatic, unnecessary. But this time their words didn't carry the same power. For once, the need to explain was gone. There was strength in silence, in walking away without leaving behind bitterness or revenge. It was not about teaching anyone a lesson. It was about ending one that had already gone on too long. In the end, what remained wasn't anger, but understanding. Love should never require begging, and respect should never have to be earned from those who claim to care. Sometimes losing others is the only way to find yourself again. What began as heartbreak turned into liberation, and what once felt like a wound became the proof of growth. A reminder that choosing peace, even when it hurts, is the most powerful act of self-love there is. In the end, everything came full circle. What started as a simple act of love turned into a painful journey of realization. The intention had always been pure: to give, to show appreciation, to create joy. But along the way, it revealed the truth about human nature, loyalty, and the limits of selflessness. Sometimes love is tested not by what we give, but by how others receive it. What was meant to bring people closer ended up uncovering hidden insecurities, jealousy, and the painful truth that not everyone values kindness the same way. The betrayal wasn't just about a trip. It was about being replaced in a space that was built with love. It showed that even the deepest bonds can break when respect fades. Yet within that pain came growth, because disappointment has a way of opening eyes. It teaches who truly stands beside you and who only stays when they can benefit. It reminds that love without appreciation is emptiness, and that loyalty without honesty is only a beautiful lie. From the first spark of excitement to the quiet realization of betrayal, every step was a lesson. It wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about learning that peace sometimes comes from letting go. There comes a time when silence speaks louder than explanations. So when walking away is not weakness but strength. Because choosing yourself after being broken isn't selfish, it's survival. The story doesn't end in bitterness. It ends in acceptance. Sometimes the people who hurt the most are the same ones once loved the deepest. But every heartbreak carries wisdom, every loss carries growth. And every ending holds the beginning of self-respect. Love given freely is never wasted. It simply returns in a different form, often as strength, clarity, and peace. So the real conclusion isn't about who was wrong or right. It's about realizing that genuine love will always find its way back, even if not from the same people. And when that happens, it won't come with conditions or betrayal. It will come with understanding, and it will finally feel like home.